Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the One of Us podcast. Today is episode 2 of our counterculture series. We're going to be talking about the parable of the prodigal son and really digging in deep there and taking out just truths that we can really take with us on a daily basis as we live our lives. And so, first and foremost, Juan, I'd love for you to give us a little summary of the parable of the prodigal son for everyone that's listening so that we can all be on the same page as we continue to chat.
No, of course, yeah. I really love the prodigal son. Is one of those parables, super long. You can find it in Luke 15, 11 through 32. It's a giant story that Jesus kind of portrays about a master, an owner of a vast amount of land, right? He has two sons, and one of his sons, the younger one, wants his inheritance now before his father dies. So his father, being a loving and kind dad, he gives him his son what he wants. He separates his inheritance in two. The older son stays with the master while the younger son kind of goes to a distant land and basically squanders his inheritance on like prostitution, on what the world has, to the point where he's literally at rock bottom, working a job that no one really wants. And he's kind of looking at the slop of the pigs, and he kind of has this epiphany of like, wow, back home, even my father's servants had more than I. So he devised a plan to go back home, apologize to his dad, and basically be like, I'm not worthy to be your son. At least hire me as a servant. So he gets back and he basically tells his dad, like, yo, I'm not worthy to be your son. But the dad was so excited to see him come back home that he ran, he hugged him, he gave him all these things. They killed the fattened calf for the party. And, they were celebrating that he came home safely. But the older son, working a long day's work, came home and saw that everyone was celebrating his younger son's return. And he was very frustrated until his father came out to console him. And he was kind of telling him, like, hey, like, I've been with you day one. I've never betrayed you or squandered your wealth. And you don't even celebrate for me. The master tells him, like, hey, you always have me and everything I have is yours, but your brother was dead and now he's alive. He was lost but found. So that's kind of like the very synopsis of the parable, but I think it has a lot to do with today's culture, and I'm kind of just wanting to unpack it with you guys today. So I think the first thing is how the younger son kind of wanted his inheritance and went off to a distant land to squander it. I feel like that's kind of like what the world is today, kind of asks us to take our inheritance and use it on the world. What are your guys' take on it?
Maybe could you explain to our viewers like what you mean by inheritance? Because for then at that point, obviously it was what the father was giving his sons, income. But how do you think that equates to today?
That's a good question. I think for me, when I think of inheritance, first thing is maybe like your well being, right? So I think there's a sense that you attain like joy, peace, like purpose. And I think that the master in this case, is God. And he kind of gives us those things. But sometimes I think we want the free will to kind of squander it on worldly passions. And when we are in the world, we realize that it can't offer us that joy, that peace, that purpose.
When you originally posed the question, I was thinking of kind of what you were saying of, the gifts, talents, resources, and abilities that the Lord has given us. And oftentimes we can use those things rather than to honor or glorify God with what He's given us. And we take like almost possession of it and feel like it's something that we earned or deserve, when that could be farthest from the truth.
Yeah, and I don't want to confuse anyone. Like, obviously, the inheritance in the parable is talking about our everlasting life, salvation with Christ, and that's like kind of like the big picture. But I think this parable is so countercultural, because I think that when you ask for your inheritance, right, like you ask for that promise to be given to you, in a sense, for you to make your own decision and to kind of squander it, which I feel like is basically not accept God and go into the world. I feel like that's the form of squandering.
Taking like good things and then using it for bad things that are like selfish.
And asking God for blessings and then, using it for selfish ambition.
Have you guys ever wanted like something that you thought would make you happy and maybe it didn't end up making you as happy as you realized?
I think for me, like something that kind of pops into my mind sometimes is, obviously I'm a nurse, so I went into nursing as a career to like help others, but I felt a part of my struggles in college was to become a nurse and attain that status, and it would bring me joy. But I felt like when I was actually nursing, I didn't experience joy because I feel like I put too much weight on the status of that career. So I feel like in that way, that was me squandering a sense of my purpose, where it's like, this is why people say, like, do everything unto the Lord, because that's where you find the most joy.
I would say similarly, when you idolize anything or you make anything your identity that isn't the Lord, this is more common to happen, where you are fighting for something or you're chasing after something and then you realize, oh, it really wasn't all that I made it out to be. And for me, it was similar in academics, thinking that the higher I strived, the better I did, the harder I tried, that would make me feel like fulfilled and that I completed something or that I had potential or purpose. But really, all it did was make me feel empty. And I think that's true for anything in our lives that we make our identity, because the only thing that can fill us is God. So I think it's important to kind of rewire our thoughts in that area.
I think the crazy thing about this story, I know I've brought it up in other conversations, is the whole cancel culture. I feel like this is something that we can definitely apply. I feel like things like this would happen today. There might be kind of an area of cancel culture. So I think since we're talking about being the opposite of culture, going back to the Father and just asking for forgiveness and even forgiving other people is definitely something that isn't really common nowadays.
I feel like that word kind of just gets thrown around, and I feel it's kind of lost a bit of its meaning. But I saw a quote, and I absolutely love this quote. And someone had said, you should love people so well, because when Jesus loved Judas, he loved him so well, no one ever suspected that he was going to be the one to do what he did, knowing that Jesus knew the entire time that this guy that's following him around, that's literally 2 feet behind him, is going to betray him. But Jesus showed so much grace and mercy and love to this person, knowing what they were going to do. Like, can you imagine if you knew that your murderer was just chilling and was being your friend? I can tell you there is no way I'd be able to be cool with that person. But Jesus did it well. And kind of like what you were talking, and even talking about this, like when the son came home, the father had loved him so much that if no one would know of all the things that he had done, of all these things, and the father had loved him and shown him so much grace and mercy that not even the son knew how to receive this, because he was probably in a shock, like, well, you should be mad at me, like yelling at me, or as Tati was saying, canceling me out, and yet you're throwing a feast. And it's not what we do, because I think sometimes in our culture, it's like, you can forgive the person, but don't forget what they did. And so it's like, are you really forgiving if you're not forgetting? Like, because you're kind of holding it over their head. And I think that's what culture says, but I think what Jesus says is to forgive, to show grace, and to love so well that they'll never doubt.
And a piece of the story, too, that I think oftentimes gets overlooked is this idea that the son came back. And I think it takes a level of humility and like an emptying of pride to be like, you know what, I'm going to face the facts. I'm going to go back with nothing. I'm going to go back and basically prove the point of like, I destroyed my inheritance. I destroyed everything that I was given. And I'm just going to beg to be a servant. Like, I think there takes a lot of humility to be able to be like, you know what, I'm
Well,
going
I
to
wanted
face
to ask a
this head on.
question. Sorry, I just actually wanted a question on this, actually, because I think that in today's culture, right, we don't really see that a lot. Like, why do you think today, practically, right? Because I think we can say it like, we can repeat what was happening in the story, but I think that if you bring it practically into everyone's life, it's like, everyone falls short, right? Like, no one hasn't dabbled in the world, right? No one hasn't, except for Jesus, right? So it takes people to recognize they're wrong, like Crystal's saying, and then basically go home and confess it. But that is so countercultural in its own self, because I think that in our culture, it's like you need to build up such an image that you can't be wrong. You can't express your faults. You can't like do that. So why do you think like in our culture that's so hard to do?
I really think it's exactly what you're saying. People don't want to admit fault or admit wrongdoing or become vulnerable or intransparent in the way that, you know, we're all in this together, we're all running the same race. I think people want to appear differently than what they are. I think we live in a world with a lot of masks and a lot of people kind of wearing different ones in different scenarios. And even in the Christian sphere, to appear kind of like perfect in a way, but that's doing us an injustice and is kind of a slap in the face to God because we are sinners. Like, he came to save sinners. So to appear like anything else, I just think is just sad. And it's a way that I think the enemy has really confused our generation, because there's so much beauty and healing when there's confession and repentance. We even see it. Like, he was going in one direction and this younger brother decided to go all the way back in the wrong direction, like head towards the right thing, the righteous thing. And we need one another. You know, James says that we need one another to find healing. So confess your sins to one another. And I just think that we've been lied to, that somehow that's a negative thing, like, and it's not.
Yeah, also what Vic was saying, you know, because it's one thing to admit, and it's a frightening thing, right? Because I feel like it's a vulnerable action in humility, first for to the Lord and then to others. But I think the thing that I love about the Master is that his primary focus isn't his sin, but rather how to heal him. Because I think I heard this a long time ago from like a pastor back home, but he was talking about like sometimes with sin, don't state the obvious. When someone kind of comes and tells you like, hey, I'm wrong, for you to then reply with, oh, you're wrong, is like no duh type deal. You know what I mean? It's like it doesn't really help anyone or anything. But if you respond with, hey, I messed up, with, hey, I still love you, it's like a reflection of God's love. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it also ties in with that verse where, you know, how they were saying, like, when you fast or when you do these things, you know, do it all for the Lord, do it for God, you know, do it for the kingdom. But if you're going and you're telling people about all your good deeds and all this stuff, this and that, and when you get your good words and your praise from people, then, you know, that's where your reward is. Don't expect it to be in heaven because you're going out and you're seeking it from other people, not from allowing God to just see it. I think with the older son, he was probably having a hard time because he was doing what he needed to do. And I think the father was seeing that and loved that. But then I think the older brother probably got jealous that his younger brother was being praised. I think how he perceived it is that his younger brother was coming back, was being praised, having these feasts, and he didn't do anything to deserve it. And he was upset. He's like, I deserve it. He doesn't deserve it. Kind of getting into that human mindset. And I think the father just had a better perspective. It's not about whether he does or doesn't deserve it. I'm just happy that my son has come home. And even, you know, it says where when one person repents, like all of heaven rejoices. And so I think it was just a moment of jealousy and just hard to see that his brother was receiving something and he didn't deserve it, because we like to judge all the time and say, well, that person doesn't deserve it, but I do because I did the right thing. And so I think, yeah, it just goes against culture, but the father had a better perspective.
Yeah. And two, I'm just thinking about it because sometimes I think we can read the Bible and be like, how could these people do this stuff? But it's like, we do this all the time. So I try to kind of personalize it a little bit more. And, you know, it is human nature to be, I think, have a justice driven mindset. And God is also justice driven, but he has a dual spirit. Like, he's a justice driven God and a loving God and a forgiving God and a gracious God and a merciful God. So he has all of these characteristics. I try to put myself in the perspective of the story. And I really like where you're going with this, Juan, with this idea of one person remaining faithful the whole time. And then you have another person who didn't, was extremely faithless, but then came back with repentance and life change and surrender, right, and humility. And then they were also viewed as faithful at that point, and your portion is the same. But this idea of, like, you know, if you can help it, it's not worth it to be the younger brother. Like, his experience, not worth it. He had a tough time.
Tough times.
Yeah, and I think that's why, following the Lord and just in our path of righteousness, what Paul says, just because the Lord is gracious and forgiving and merciful doesn't mean you choose sin, right? He's like, that's not what that means, Paul in the New Testament. And I think in the same way, just the encouragement to be the older brother and bask in the faithfulness of God. And what Juan's saying, you have the same portion, but it's almost better. It is better, actually, to just remain steadfast in the Lord through that whole time. But we are sinners and we fall short of the glory of God, and there is grace to cover us through repentance, right?
I think the biggest thing that I love about this passage is it definitely proves that you cannot earn your salvation, but there's obviously that comparison. Because that's why the brother technically got upset. Because that's how I always view it. I always view as the father being God, and then the two sons being two types of believers. And that does everything right, that checks the boxes. And the other one that kind of falls behind and just comes back, with a repentant heart.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at it in that perspective, the older brother might feel unfair and be like, I did everything right. Why am I not being celebrated? Why is he getting all the attention? And I think that as a believer, we should always have that mindset that it's not earned, because at the end of the day, we all fall short. So, all of us should be like the younger brother. I know it's not biblical, but comparison is a thief of joy, like that little saying.
Shout out to Vic.
If you know, you know.
This is my thing. I just feel like I'm kind of shook more about the older brother than the younger brother, because the younger brother, he was more upfront about it. Did he have a harder time probably than the older brother? Absolutely. He basically on the dirt ground has to humiliate himself to ask for forgiveness, and then finally receives it, right? But I just feel like it's so the audacity, right, of the older son to basically say that every day that he was with his father wasn't a day worth celebrating in its own right. I don't know. I just feel like for me, the story also talks about being content. Sometimes following Christ, I feel like people don't have this level of contentness where it's and what is content, right? It's just being joyful for what the Lord has already given you. Sometimes I feel like the world, especially in individualistic cultures, you kind of have this drive of wanting more and more and more and more. I feel like something that was wrong with the older son was he wanted more and more and more and felt like he had the right for more. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes as Christians, you can get carried away like that when you see someone who maybe is super rich and they're using their money for nefarious moments, and you're like, I'm a faithful Christian, and God, why isn't he blessing me with wealth or something like that, right? And I feel like that's such a wrong mindset, because it's kind of when we all die, everything on this earth doesn't even exist. So what really matters more in this earth? You worshiping Christ on a Sunday, or that person who woke up early in the morning and grinded through work? You know what I mean? That's something I try to remind myself, especially when it comes to Sunday. Monday through Saturday, I'm grinding all day. I'm working and doing this and doing that. And I just feel so exhausted, right? And then I go to church and I'm sitting down in that rest. And I tell myself, sometimes from the worldly perspective, it feels like a waste of time. But spiritually, that's probably the most important thing I'm doing all week. No joke. But anyways, guys, just to wrap this beautiful podcast up, The Prodigal Son, countercultural episode number 2. I just really want to kind of highlight those key points that go against our culture, right? Instead of wasting away our purpose, our joy, our security on whatever the world can promise, let's lean on what God has by being close to him. And, we always fall short of God's glory. When we do, let's have the humility to recognize our sin and not be afraid to confess our sin, first to the Father, but also to each other, and for those receiving that confession, to not be judgeful, haters, or destructives, but kind of like what Vic said, to love someone so strong in that moment that they couldn't even recognize their own sin. And ultimately, to remember, for those who have been on that narrow road for a really long time, that your reward is being close with God, that's a reward that the culture can never offer. So I hope you guys really enjoy this episode. Episode 3 is going to be, even more. We're going to be building on the momentum. But before we kind of close off, I'd like to pass this moment to the one and only Tatiana.
Alrighty. So, not really related to the topic, but this was something that I actually talked with my friend. He's actually Jewish, but because he was talking about the Shabbat, and I was like, oh, that's a good question. Do you think it should be mandatory to like disconnect from the world or shut off the internet for like a day?
Have you read your Bible?
No.
Because
I'm
I
just
don't
kidding.
feel like we
I'm just
do
kidding.
this. I'll be honest. I don't feel like
You
we
should.
do this.
You should. That's what God says. You should. I think Crystal said this a week ago to someone. It's like when you start making things that are good for you legalistic, it goes downhill. So it's like what the Lord said, right? Like man wasn't made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for man. It's like basically saying like we weren't made to function the Sabbath, but rather the Sabbath was made to help us. Now, people kind of legalize it here and there, but I personally think like, should it be mandatory? No. But like, I'd be in favor if churches were like, hey, we're actually going to start church Saturday at 6 p.m. and you're going to just like show up and there's no phones, no nothing. And you just have fellowship, go home, sleep, wake up and go to church. I think that would be a cool extension of church that I would be like in favor of.
My question is more like, what if we mandatory, like, let's just say the whole country just shuts off the internet and everything for one entire day?
Okay. As
A
a
week.
premise, I think that would be healthy for everyone involved. But as just in my spiritual understanding, it's like these choices that we make, we have free will. And if we didn't have free will to actually do it and pursue God, then there's no point. It's like saying everyone has to sign this contract that you're a Christian. That's not real. You know what I mean? Even if everything gets shut off on the quote unquote Sabbath, it's like you're not doing it out of a heart of choosing it joyfully, and people will still find ways to be doing stuff.
Okay, real talk. I have a real question. You know
It's
how
too
like
much.
on Sunday Chick-fil-A's closed and like you crave it really bad? What if everything else that was food related was closed on Sunday? How detrimental would that be?
I think people would go hungry. Not everyone has like groceries and stuff.
All right, next one. Texting is better than audio messages.
It depends. Actually, no, texting is better because if you send me a long audio message, there's
Actually,
not a guarantee I'm
this is what I
gonna
think.
listen.
Okay, look, Vic, I understand where she's coming from, but I feel like that's more so because you have so much information to go through. Vic just doesn't want to go through it all one by one. She just kind of wants to hear it while she's also
I
resting.
literally flat out thought you were gonna say, I get where Vic is coming from, but she's just being lazy.
No. Don't put words in my mouth. What I'm saying is this. I think if you're texting or if you're talking nonchalantly, like you're going to send someone something like that isn't intense or serious, 100% text message. But I've had many events, and so have other people, where you'll text someone and they'll take it the wrong way when you meant it a different way because there's no tone in text messages. So I'd say if you're going to say something remotely serious or you feel like you might offend someone, just go with an audio message because they'll hear your voice on how you're saying it.
Do you think it's better at that point to just call them?
If they're not busy, yeah.
That's fair. Or you could set up a meeting. Well, okay, that's a good one. Better to do it on the phone or better to do it in person?
I think both are similar. Like if you FaceTime someone and talk to them in person, I think it can be similar. But here's my thing. I agree with Juan. I like voice memos because just hearing someone's voice and interacting with them, and sometimes people have opposing schedules where a phone call is really hard to schedule. But if you can talk to each other on your own time frame throughout the day, I think that's beneficial. And some people's long is not other people's long. Like for Victoria, I'm pretty sure like 25 seconds is long. But for me, I'm like 5 minutes, that's fine. Well, I'm doing whatever, I'll listen to
Mine,
it.
25 seconds is fine. If you're sending a minute 30 plus, that's too long.
I think anything over 20 seconds, you need to call someone.
Oh my gosh.
20 seconds is a long time. You know
It's
how
not
long is
that
Abraham
long.
Lincoln's memoir was like 4 minutes on Gettysburg.
I don't even know what you're saying right now.
I don't know how that could. What does
Okay,
that
if you're
have to do with
This
anything?
is Juan's,
look.
what's it called? Roman Empire.
No, I'm just saying like if you are saying like, oh, a minute 30 is like a reasonable thing, I'm like, that's almost half as long as the Gettysburg Address. That's insane.
No one ever thinks about that. And if you do, please let us know in the comments.
If
That
you're
was-
in speech and debate, you know what I'm talking about. 1 minute talking straight is long. That's why I'm like 20 plus seconds. Dude, that's
I
long.
wonder what's the longest sentence any of us have had on the podcast since we started.
Probably like 5 minutes at least.
Yeah, it's probably Crystal not taking a breath. And on that note, I'll keep the ending of this short and simple for all those viewers, and more so for Juan. 20 seconds or less, people. But hey, we love you guys. We hope you have an amazing week until we see you next time. Until then, stay tuned. I don't know where I was going with that, but we'll see you guys next week. All right, bye.